The sun beat down on the dusty plains, baking the earth a cracked brown. 3 years. 3 years since Thaddeus Bell had spoken more than a handful of words to another soul. His ranch, a small, weathered cabin and a few acres of parched land, was a testament to his solitary existence. He'd chosen this life, a life of quiet desperation, a penance for, well, for things best left buried. He woke before dawn each day, the rooster's crow his only alarm. He'd tend to his meager garden, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. He'd fix fences, mend roofs, and do everything himself. There was a rhythm to it, a monotonous cycle that kept the ghosts at bay, or so he hoped. His cabin was sparsely furnished. A rough-hewn table, a couple of chairs, a bed covered with a patched quilt. A rifle hung above the fireplace, a silent reminder of a past he tried to forget. Pictures were few, only one of a younger Thaddeus, smiling, with a woman whose face was now a blur in his memory. He'd come here seeking solace, a place to disappear. He'd traded a life of purpose for one of oblivion, convinced he was doing the world a favor by removing himself from it. He'd let the grief consume him, turning his heart to stone. He saw no reason to change. He was comfortable in his misery, in his isolation. It was a shield, a wall he'd built brick by painful brick. His days were long and silent, filled with the endless chores of survival. Evenings were spent staring into the fire, the flickering flames mirroring the turmoil in his soul. He rarely ventured into town, only when supplies were absolutely necessary. He'd keep his head down, avoid eye contact, and return to his self-imposed prison as quickly as possible. He thought he was content. He told himself he was content. But deep down, a tiny ember of hope still flickered, a faint whisper of a life he'd once known, a life filled with laughter, love, and purpose. He ignored it, stamped it down, afraid of what might happen if he let it grow. Better to remain numb, to feel nothing at all. Little did he know that quiet existence was about to be shattered. The solitude he so desperately craved was about to be invaded. And the man he thought he had become was about to be challenged by a desperate plea for help. A plea that would awaken something long dormant within him. The first sign was the dust cloud on the horizon, a swirling brown plume that disrupted the otherwise clear blue sky. Thaddeus squinted, his hand shielding his eyes. Riders. More than one. He hadn't had visitors in months, and his gut clenched with a familiar unease. He hoped they would pass by. He truly did. He watched as the cloud grew larger, the riders drawing closer. He could now make out shapes, horses, and were those women? As they crested the small rise that led to his property, he saw them clearly. 6 young women, their faces streaked with dirt and exhaustion, their clothes torn and travel-worn. They looked terrified. They rode up to his gate, their horses lathered and breathing hard. One of the women, braver than the others, dismounted and approached him cautiously. She was young, maybe 18, with fiery red hair and eyes that held a surprising amount of strength despite her obvious fear. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse. "We need your help." Thaddeus remained silent, his expression unreadable. He stood behind the gate, a barrier between him and the outside world, a world he had deliberately shut himself off from. He didn't want to get involved. He couldn't get involved. He had nothing to offer anyone, least of all these desperate women. "We're being hunted," the woman continued, her voice trembling slightly. "By slavers. They'll kill us if they find us." Slavers. The word hung in the air, heavy and sickening. Thaddeus felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Anger. But he quickly suppressed it. Anger was a dangerous emotion, one that could lead to trouble. And trouble was the last thing he needed. "We just need a place to rest," the woman pleaded. "A place to hide, just for a little while. We won't cause any trouble. We promise." The other women remained on their horses, their eyes fixed on Thaddeus, their faces etched with hope and fear. He could see the desperation in their eyes, the sheer terror of being hunted. He knew what it was like to be hunted, to be afraid. He looked at them, really looked at them, and saw not just fear, but also resilience. They were young, but they were strong. They had survived this far against all odds, and they were asking for his help. He hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to turn them away, to protect himself, to remain isolated. But something was changing inside him. The wall he had built around his heart was beginning to crumble. The ember of hope, long suppressed, flickered brighter. He took a deep breath, the dry air filling his lungs. He looked at the red-haired woman, her eyes pleading, her face etched with determination. He knew he couldn't turn them away. He just couldn't. "Open the gate," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Get inside." The women led their horses into the small corral beside the cabin. Thaddeus watched them, his mind racing. He hadn't had this many people on his property in years. He felt a strange mix of apprehension and something else, something akin to purpose. He gestured towards the well. "Water your horses," he said. "Then come inside." He turned and walked towards the cabin, the women following behind him. As he opened the door, the musty smell of disuse hit him. The cabin was small, only one main room with a sleeping loft above. It was hardly fit for one person, let alone 7. "It's not much," he said, "but it's shelter." The red-haired woman, who had introduced herself as Sarah, nodded gratefully. "It's more than we had," she said. "Thank you." The women entered the cabin, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. They were clearly exhausted, both physically and emotionally. They huddled together, seeking comfort and reassurance from each other. Thaddeus watched them, feeling a pang of sympathy. He knew what it was like to be afraid, to be alone, to have nowhere to turn. He had lived that way for 3 long years. He cleared his throat. "There's some stew on the stove," he said. "It's not much, but it'll fill your bellies." He busied himself stirring the stew, avoiding eye contact. He wasn't used to taking care of people. He wasn't sure he even knew how, but he felt compelled to help these women, to offer them whatever little comfort he could. As the women ate, they began to relax, their faces softening. They shared stories of their escape, of the horrors they had witnessed, of the families they had left behind. Thaddeus listened in silence, his heart aching for their suffering. He learned that they had been working in a mine, forced into labor by ruthless men who saw them as nothing more than property. They had planned their escape for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike. They had managed to overpower their guards and flee into the night, but they knew their pursuers would be relentless. "They won't stop until they find us," Sarah said, her voice filled with dread. "They'll hunt us down like animals." Thaddeus looked at her, his eyes filled with a newfound determination. "They won't find you here," he said. "I won't let them." His words surprised even him. He had never thought of himself as a protector, as someone who could stand up against evil. But something had changed. The women's plight had awakened something within him, a sense of responsibility, a desire to do what was right. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew he was putting himself in danger. But he couldn't stand by and watch these women be dragged back into slavery. He had to help them. He had to fight. For the first time in 3 years, Thaddeus Bell felt like he had a reason to live, a reason to fight, and he was ready to do whatever it took to protect these women, even if it meant facing his own demons in the process. The solitude he had so fiercely guarded was gone, replaced by a purpose he never expected to find again. Night fell, casting long shadows across the ranch. The women, exhausted, settled down to sleep, some on the floor, others in the loft. Thaddeus sat by the fire, his thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He looked at the sleeping women, their faces peaceful in the firelight. He wondered what their lives had been like before they were enslaved. He wondered if they would ever be truly free. He felt a surge of protectiveness towards them, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his wife. He closed his eyes, and the memories came flooding back. His wife, Mary, her laughter, her kindness, her unwavering belief in him. He had promised to protect her, to keep her safe. But he had failed. He had let her down, and the guilt had consumed him, driving him into this self-imposed exile. He had convinced himself that he was doing the right thing, that he was protecting himself from further pain. But now, looking at these women, he realized he had been wrong. He had been hiding running away from his responsibilities. He had allowed his grief to paralyze him, to turn him into a shell of a man. He opened his eyes and stared into the flames, seeing not just the fire, but also his own reflection. He saw the lines etched on his face, the weariness in his eyes, the emptiness in his soul. He knew he couldn't continue living this way. He had to change. He had to find a way to redeem himself. But how? He was just one man against a group of ruthless slavers. He had no weapons, no resources, no allies. He was outgunned, outmanned, and out of his depth. He thought about running. He could pack up his meager belongings and disappear into the wilderness, leaving the women to fend for themselves. It would be the smart thing to do, the logical thing to do. It would be the easy way out. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't abandon these women to their fate. He had given them his word, and he wasn't about to break it. He had made a promise, and he was going to keep it, no matter the cost. He stood up and walked to the fireplace, taking down his rifle. He checked the ammunition, ensuring it was loaded. He hadn't fired a gun in years, but he knew he hadn't forgotten how. He looked at the rifle, a tool of both destruction and protection. He hoped he wouldn't have to use it, but he was prepared to do whatever it took to defend these women, even if it meant taking a life. He sat back down by the fire, his rifle resting across his lap. He knew the slavers would come. It was only a matter of time, and when they did, he would be ready. He closed his eyes again, and this time, the memories were different. He saw Mary smile, her eyes filled with pride. He heard her voice, whispering words of encouragement. He felt her presence, a guiding force, urging him to do what was right. He knew what he had to do. He had to fight. He had to protect these women. He had to honor Mary's memory. He had to become the man she had always believed him to be. He had to be brave. The morning arrived, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Thaddeus woke before dawn, the fire reduced to embers. He quietly stoked it back to life, the crackling flames chasing away the chill. He knew they couldn't stay in the cabin forever. It was too exposed, too easy to find. But for now, it was a sanctuary, a place where they could rest and regroup. He went outside to survey the land. The air was crisp and clean, the silence broken only by the chirping of birds. He scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of the slavers. Nothing, but he knew they were out there, somewhere. He returned to the cabin and found the women stirring. They looked rested, but their eyes still held a hint of fear. Sarah was already up, helping to prepare a simple breakfast of cornmeal and water. As they ate, they talked. They shared more stories about their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. Thaddeus listened, learning their names, their personalities, their fears. There was Emily, the quiet one, who loved to read. There was Maria, the strong one, who had a talent for fixing things. There was Lily, the gentle one, who always had a kind word for everyone. And there were Chloe and Abigail, sisters, who were inseparable. They were all so different, yet they were united by their shared experience, their shared trauma. They had formed a bond, a sisterhood, that gave them strength and resilience. Sarah spoke of the man who led the slavers. His name was Wade Garrett. She described him as a ruthless and cruel man who enjoyed inflicting pain and suffering. She said he was a former federal marshal who had been stripped of his badge for corruption and abuse of power. He thinks he's above the law, Sarah said, her voice filled with anger. He thinks he can do whatever he wants. Thaddeus felt a chill run down his spine. The name Wade Garrett sounded familiar. He couldn't quite place it, but he had a feeling he had heard it before. A long time ago, he pushed the thought aside. He had more pressing concerns to worry about. He needed to find a way to protect these women, to keep them safe from Garrett and his men. He spent the morning fortifying the cabin, reinforcing the windows and doors. He showed the women how to use the rifle, teaching them basic self-defense techniques. He knew it wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As the day wore on, the tension grew thicker. They all knew it was only a matter of time before Garrett arrived. They waited, listening for the sound of approaching horses, their hearts pounding in their chests. The refuge in the cabin felt less and less safe, more and more like a trap. But they had nowhere else to go. They were trapped, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Thaddeus knew he had to be ready. He He had to be strong. He had to protect these women, no matter the cost, because their lives depended on it, and so perhaps did his own. The sun was high in the sky when they arrived. This time, the dust cloud was bigger, more menacing. Thaddeus stood on the porch, his rifle in hand. The women huddled behind him, peering through the cracks in the walls. He saw them emerge from the dust, a group of about a dozen men, all heavily armed and riding rough-looking horses. In the lead was a man who stood out from the rest. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He wore a dusty black coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his face. It was Wade Garrett. Garrett stopped his horse a few yards from the cabin, his eyes fixed on Thaddeus. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, his movements radiating an aura of power and menace. Well, Garrett said, his voice a low growl. If it isn't Thaddeus Bell. Long time no see. Thaddeus didn't respond. He just stared at Garrett, his heart pounding in his chest. He remembered him now. He remembered the name, the face, the voice. He remembered everything. Garrett had been his mentor, his friend, his partner. They had worked together as federal marshals, enforcing the law, protecting the innocent. But Garrett had always been different, more ruthless, more willing to bend the rules. Thaddeus had turned a blind eye to Garrett's methods for a while, convinced that the ends justified the means. But then, Garrett had crossed the line. He had killed an innocent man, a man who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Thaddeus had confronted Garrett, accusing him of murder. Garrett had denied it, but Thaddeus knew the truth. He had reported Garrett to the authorities, leading to his arrest and subsequent dismissal from the Marshal Service. Garrett had vowed revenge. He had promised to make Thaddeus pay for what he had done. Thaddeus had tried to forget about him, to move on with his life. But he had always known that Garrett would come back. I see you've been keeping busy, Garrett said, his eyes scanning the cabin. Harboring fugitives. That's a serious offense, Thaddeus. They're not fugitives, Thaddeus said, his voice steady. They're innocent women running from men like you. Garrett chuckled. Innocent? Don't be naive, Thaddeus. Everyone's guilty of something. It's just a matter of finding out what it is. He paused, his eyes narrowing. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here for those women. They belong to me. They don't belong to anyone, Thaddeus said, his grip tightening on his rifle. They're free. Free? Garrett laughed. There's no such thing as free, Thaddeus. Everyone's a slave to something. To money, to power, to lust. These women are slaves to me, and I intend to keep them that way. He took a step forward, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. Now step aside, Thaddeus, and I promise I won't hurt you. Just hand over the women, and we can forget this ever happened. Thaddeus didn't move. He stood his ground, his eyes locked on Garrett's. He knew what he had to do. He had to protect these women, even if it meant facing his former friend, his former mentor, his former partner. He had to face Wade Garrett, and he had to win, because their lives depended on it, and so perhaps did his own. The past had finally caught up to him. I can't do that, Wade, Thaddeus said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. I won't let you take them. Garrett's eyes narrowed. You always were a stubborn fool, Thaddeus. Always had to do things your way. But this time, your stubbornness is going to get you killed. He nodded to his men, and they spread out, surrounding the cabin. The women inside gasped, their faces pale with fear. Thaddeus could feel their eyes on him, their hopes and fears intertwined with his own. You don't have to do this, Wade, Thaddeus said, trying to reason with him. You can walk away. Just let these women go. Walk away. Garrett scoffed. After all the trouble I've gone through to find them, after all the money I've invested, you think I'm just going to walk away? He spat on the ground. You always were so righteous, Thaddeus. Always so quick to judge. But you're no better than me. You're just a coward, hiding out here in the middle of nowhere, trying to forget your past. My past is none of your concern, Thaddeus said, his voice hardening. And these women are under my protection now. If you want them, you'll have to go through me. That's what I was hoping you'd say, Garrett said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. I've been waiting a long time for this, Thaddeus. A long time to settle the score. He drew his gun, the sound echoing in the still air. Thaddeus raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. "Remember Mary, Thaddeus?" Garrett asked, his voice dripping with malice. "Remember how she begged for her life? Remember how you couldn't do anything to save her?" Thaddeus flinched, the memories flooding back, raw and painful. He could see Mary's face, her eyes filled with terror, her voice pleading for help. He could feel the guilt, the shame, the helplessness. Garrett had struck a nerve, a deep and festering wound. Thaddeus struggled to maintain his composure, to keep his emotions in check. He couldn't let Garrett get to him. He couldn't let his past cloud his judgment. "That was your fault, Thaddeus," Garrett continued, twisting the knife. "You could have saved her, but you were too weak, too afraid." "Shut up, Wade," Thaddeus said, his voice trembling with rage. "Just shut up. Or what?" Garrett taunted. "What are you going to do, Thaddeus? Shoot me? You don't have the guts." He took another step forward, his gun raised, his eyes filled with hate. "It's over, Thaddeus. Just give up, and maybe, just maybe, I'll make it quick." Thaddeus closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He had to focus. He had to be strong. He had to protect these women. He had to honor Mary's memory. He opened his eyes, his gaze unwavering. "It's not over until I say it's over, Wade," he said, his voice filled with determination. "And I'm not giving up." He cocked his rifle, the sound echoing in the air. The standoff had reached its climax. The battle was about to begin, and Thaddeus knew that only one of them would walk away alive. The sins of the past were coming home to roost. Garrett's words hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at Thaddeus's heart. Mary, her name, was a constant ache, a reminder of everything he had lost, everything he had failed to protect. He had met Mary when he was a young, idealistic marshal, fresh out of training. She was a schoolteacher, full of life and compassion. He had been drawn to her kindness, her unwavering belief in justice. They had fallen in love quickly, their lives intertwining, their futures seemingly bright. But their happiness had been short-lived. Garrett, even then, had been walking a dangerous path, blurring the lines between right and wrong. He'd gotten involved with a powerful gang, turning a blind eye to their illegal activities in exchange for a cut of their profits. Thaddeus had tried to reason with Garrett, to persuade him to turn himself in. But Garrett had refused, convinced that he was untouchable. The gang had grown bolder, more brazen, their crimes escalating. One day, they had targeted Mary's school, demanding protection money. Mary had refused to pay, standing up to them with courage and defiance. The gang had retaliated, setting fire to the school. Thaddeus had arrived too late. The school was engulfed in flames, and Mary was trapped inside. He had tried to save her, but the fire was too intense, the smoke too thick. He had watched helplessly as the building collapsed, burying Mary beneath the rubble. He had blamed himself for her death. He had been so focused on trying to expose Garrett that he had neglected his duty to protect Mary. He had allowed his ambition to blind him, leading to her tragic end. The guilt had consumed him, driving him to the brink of despair. He had quit the marshal service, unable to face the world, unable to forgive himself. He had sought solace in isolation, hoping to escape the pain, the memories, the shame. But Garrett's arrival had shattered his carefully constructed world, forcing him to confront the past he had tried so hard to bury. He realized that he couldn't run away from his failures. He had to face them, to learn from them, to find a way to atone for his mistakes. He looked at the women huddled behind him, their faces filled with fear and hope. He knew that he couldn't let them suffer the same fate as Mary. He couldn't allow Garrett to destroy their lives. He had to protect them, even if it meant sacrificing himself. He had to be the man Mary had always believed him to be. He had to be brave. He took a deep breath, steeling his resolve. The past was the past. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could control the present. He could choose to fight. He could choose to protect. He could choose to be a hero. And that's exactly what he was going to do. He was finally ready to face his demons. The first shot rang out, shattering the silence. Garrett's men opened fire, bullets whizzing past Thaddeus's head, splintering the wood of the cabin. He ducked behind a makeshift barricade, returning fire with his rifle. The women inside the cabin screamed, their fear turning to panic. Sarah, however, remained calm. She grabbed the rifle Thaddeus had shown them how to use and began firing out the window, targeting Garrett's men. The other women, inspired by Sarah's bravery, joined the fight. They threw rocks, poured boiling water, and used whatever they could find to defend themselves. They were no longer just victims. They were fighters. Thaddeus fought with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed. He moved quickly, taking cover, reloading, and firing with deadly accuracy. He was protecting these women, defending his home, and settling a score that had been brewing for years. Garrett watched the battle unfold, a look of surprise on his face. He had underestimated Thaddeus. He had thought he was a broken man, a coward. But he was wrong. Thaddeus was a force to be reckoned with. The fighting raged on, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire, screams, and explosions. Thaddeus managed to pick off several of Garrett's men, reducing their numbers. But they were still outnumbered, outgunned. He knew they couldn't hold out forever. They needed a plan, a way to turn the tide of the battle. He looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with determination. He knew she was the key. He shouted to her, "Sarah, get the horses ready. We're going to make a run for it." Sarah nodded, understanding his plan. She gathered the other women and led them out the back door of the cabin, towards the corral. Garrett's men, distracted by the gunfire, didn't notice them leaving. Thaddeus continued to fire, providing cover for the women. He knew he was risking his life, but he didn't care. He had to get them to safety. Once the women were mounted on the horses, Thaddeus made his move. He burst out of the cabin, firing his rifle as he ran towards the corral. Garrett's men turned their attention to him, unleashing a hail of bullets. Thaddeus dodged and weaved, miraculously avoiding the gunfire. He reached the corral, jumped on a horse, and joined the women. "Let's go," he shouted, and they rode off, heading towards the mountains. Garrett watched them escape, his face contorted with rage. "Get them," he yelled to his men. "Don't let them get away." Garrett and his remaining men mounted their horses and gave chase. The fight for freedom had just begun, and Thaddeus knew that it was far from over. But he was ready to fight. He was ready to protect. He was ready to die, if necessary, because he had finally found something worth fighting for. He had found a reason to live, and he wasn't about to let it go. The mountain terrain was treacherous, the path narrow and winding. Thaddeus led the way, his knowledge of the area proving invaluable. The women followed close behind, their horses struggling to keep pace. They could hear Garrett and his men gaining on them, their horses' hooves pounding against the rocky ground. They needed to find a way to slow them down, to create some distance. Sarah took charge, her resourcefulness shining through. She directed the women to gather rocks and debris, creating a makeshift landslide to block the path behind them. The rocks tumbled down, creating a barrier that Garrett and his men would have to clear. It bought them some time, but not enough. They continued to ride, pushing their horses to their limits. They reached a narrow canyon, a natural bottleneck that would force Garrett and his men to approach them one at a time. Thaddeus dismounted, taking cover behind a large boulder. He signaled for the women to do the same. They were ready to make their stand. As Garrett and his men approached the canyon, Thaddeus opened fire, picking off the lead rider. The other men scattered, taking cover behind rocks and trees. The women joined the fight, using their newfound skills to defend themselves. Emily, the quiet one, surprised everyone with her sharp aim, taking down two of Garrett's men with well-placed shots. Maria, the strong one, used her strength to roll large boulders down on the attackers, creating chaos and confusion. Lily, the gentle one, used her knowledge of herbs to create a smoke screen, obscuring their position. Chloe and Abigail, the sisters, worked together, reloading weapons and providing support. They were a team, united by their shared goal of freedom. They fought with courage, determination, and a fierce loyalty to each other. They were no longer just victims. They were survivors. Garrett, frustrated by their resistance, urged his men forward. He knew he had to break their spirit, to crush their hope, but he underestimated their resolve. Thaddeus fought like a man possessed, fueled by rage and a desire for revenge. He took down several more of Garrett's men, his aim never faltering. He was protecting these women, defending their freedom, and settling a score that had been brewing for years. The battle raged on, the canyon echoing with the sounds of gunfire and screams. The women fought bravely, using their resourcefulness and teamwork to overcome the odds. They were proving to be a formidable force, a force that Garrett had not anticipated. The tide was turning, and Garrett knew it. His grip on power was slipping away, and he was losing control. The women had become the most unlikely of heroes. The final confrontation came swiftly. Garrett, enraged and desperate, charged towards Thaddeus, firing his gun wildly. Thaddeus stood his ground, his aim steady, his eyes focused. He squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck Garrett in the chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. He lay there motionless, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. The remaining slavers, seeing their leader fall, lost their will to fight. They dropped their weapons and surrendered. The battle was over. Thaddeus and the women had won. They had secured their freedom and ended the threat of slavery, at least for now. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sobs of relief from the women. They rushed to Thaddeus, embracing him, thanking him for saving their lives. He looked at them, their faces radiant with joy, their eyes filled with gratitude. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He had done it. He had protected them. He had honored Mary's memory. He had finally found redemption. They buried the dead, both Garrett's men and those they had lost in the fighting. They tended to their wounds, sharing what little supplies they had. They were exhausted, but they were alive, and they were free. They knew they couldn't stay in the mountains forever. They needed to find a safe place to settle, a place where they could rebuild their lives. Thaddeus knew just the place. He led them back to his ranch, the place he had once considered his prison. But now it felt like home. It was a place where they could start over, a place where they could build a new future. They spent the next few weeks repairing the cabin, planting crops, and tending to the animals. They worked together, sharing their skills and their stories. They formed a community, a family. Thaddeus realized that he was no longer alone. He had found a new purpose in life, a new reason to live. He was surrounded by love, friendship, and hope. He had finally found his place in the world. The threat of Garrett was gone, and with him, a part of Thaddeus's past died too. A new chapter was beginning, a chapter filled with promise, a chapter filled with hope, a chapter filled with love. They were free, truly free, and they were ready to embrace their new beginning. Together, as the months passed, the ranch transformed from a place of solitude into a thriving community. Thaddeus, inspired by Mary's legacy as a schoolteacher, decided to build a schoolhouse. He envisioned a place where the women and others in the surrounding area could learn to read and write, to expand their minds and their opportunities. He enlisted the help of the women, and together they began constructing the schoolhouse. They used their skills and their ingenuity to build a sturdy and welcoming structure. They scavenged lumber, gathered stones, and worked tirelessly, their efforts fueled by a shared vision of a brighter future. Emily, the quiet one, blossomed as she helped Thaddeus design the curriculum. She had always loved to read, and she was eager to share her passion with others. Maria, the strong one, used her skills to build sturdy desks and benches. Lily, the gentle one, decorated the schoolhouse with colorful wildflowers, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. Chloe and Abigail, the sisters, helped to organize the books and supplies. As the schoolhouse neared completion, word spread throughout the surrounding area. People were drawn to the ranch, curious about the new community that was taking shape. They saw the hope in the women's eyes, the determination in their hearts. They wanted to be a part of it. Thaddeus welcomed them with open arms. He realized that his purpose was not just to protect these women, but to create a better future for everyone. He wanted to build a community where everyone had the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to thrive. The schoolhouse opened its doors, and people from all walks of life came to learn. The women taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. Thaddeus taught history and civics. They shared their knowledge and their experiences, creating a vibrant and dynamic learning environment. The ranch became a beacon of hope, a symbol of what was possible when people came together to support each other. Thaddeus found love again, not replacing Mary, but honoring her by loving Sarah. He realized that his heart was not as broken as he thought. He learned to laugh again, to dream again, to love again. He had finally come to terms with his past, and he was ready to embrace the future. He looked at the women, their faces radiant with joy, their eyes filled with hope. He knew that he had made the right decision. He had chosen to fight for them, to protect them, to help them build a better future. And in doing so, he had found his own salvation. The school became a symbol of their resilience, their courage, and their unwavering belief in the power of education. It was a testament to their triumph over adversity, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and hopeless. The future was bright, and they were ready to face it together. Years passed. The schoolhouse flourished, educating generations of children and adults. The ranch became a haven for those seeking refuge, a place where everyone was welcome, regardless of their background or their past. Thaddeus watched the community grow, his heart filled with pride and gratitude. He had come a long way from the lonely, isolated man who had sought solace in the wilderness. He had found a new family, a new purpose, and a new love. He often visited Mary's grave, a simple stone marker beneath a shady oak tree. He would talk to her, telling her about the schoolhouse, about the women, about the community. He knew that she would be proud of him. He had finally honored her memory. He learned to forgive himself for his past failures. He realized that he couldn't change what had happened, but he could learn from it. He could use his experiences to help others, to prevent them from making the same mistakes he had made. He embraced his new life with open arms. He found joy in the simple things, the laughter of children, the warmth of the sun, the beauty of the mountains. He had finally found peace. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Thaddeus sat on the porch of his cabin, Sarah by his side. They watched the children playing in the yard, their laughter echoing through the air. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Thaddeus said, his voice filled with emotion. Sarah smiled, taking his hand in hers. "You deserve it, Thaddeus," she said. "You've earned it." He looked at her, his eyes filled with love. He knew that he had been given a second chance, a chance to make amends for his past mistakes, and he was determined to make the most of it. He had found peace, not in solitude, but in community. He had found love, not in the past, but in the present. He had found purpose, not in despair, but in hope. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath of the fresh mountain air. He could feel Mary's presence, a gentle breeze whispering through the trees. He knew that she was watching over him, smiling down on him. He opened his eyes, his gaze unwavering. He was no longer haunted by the past. He was free, truly free, and he was ready to face the future with Sarah by his side, with the women by his side, with the community by his side. He had found his place in the world. He had found his peace, and he was finally home. The end.